Hello, I'm Christopher Snedden. My guest today is Anahita Mukherji, an independent journalist currently based in the San Francisco Bay Area of the United States of America. Before moving to the United States, Anahita was assistant editor at the well-respected English language daily newspaper, The Times of India, which is a newspaper I access regularly and respect. Anahita was working for both the Mumbai and Delhi editions of this newspaper for 10 years. Anahita holds a master's degree in developmental studies from the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London, and she has written and continues to indeed write on a wide range of socio-political issues. Hi Anahita, you're the second of my guests who's actually been to our country place in regional Victoria called Kyneton. I relate this anecdote about Robin Jeffrey, my PhD supervisor who organised your trip up here, sending me an email saying, do you know anywhere in Victoria where one of my guests can see kangaroos? And I said, yes, I do actually. Please send Anahita up to our place. And you did come up and you saw kangaroos and you found this little country town that had all of these unusual Indian connections. You recall that particular visit?
Very well, and very much so. I know kangaroos are very commonplace and very boring for you guys, but for me it was thrilling. It was the first time I saw kangaroos just, roaming around and strolling about in the wild, in your backyard or outside of it. And that was a thrilling experience for me, just watching them. Yeah. And what I love about your little town of Kyneton, and I even wrote about it, was this amazing, incredible Indian connection. We go to a dhaba and hear Punjabi music playing while, I'm eating, paneer in a dhaba in Kyneton. And every second person I met had an India connection. You wrote on Kashmir. I met another professor who had studied South Indian temples. And I said, this is not what I expected from Australia.
And I introduced you to a friend who'd gone over there in the 60s when she was a young lady and dropped off in Bombay and then said, we'll pick you up in Madras in 2 months' time, which predates the internet. I remember the first time I went to India in 1981, there was no internet, and I waved goodbye at Sydney Airport and said, I'll see you in 6 weeks. And everybody said, yes, we'll see you. Hopefully we'll see you in 6 weeks. Whereas now the telecommunications are quite extraordinary. Yeah. So it's wonderful having you here. So you talk about, in one of the things that you wrote on your blog site, is you talked about desis, 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 which my understanding is that means resident or something, doesn't it? It's a word that Indians use for themselves.
Yeah. So desh means country. So desis are people from your country. And what's interesting is that Pakistanis use the word desi to talk about fellow Pakistanis, and Bangladeshis would say deshis for Bangladeshis. So yeah, that's kind of South Asian in a way.
And so in the Bay Area, there's a lot of non-Indian subcontinentals as well, from Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan.
Yeah, I think from everywhere. Yeah,
from everywhere. Wow. And how are you treated? Because I noted in one of your places you said some people are living in the shadows. They're a little bit reluctant to, I don't know, not rock the boat, but be assertive perhaps, proclaim they're Indians or whatever. Is that an issue in that part of the world? Or?
I'm not sure of the context you're talking of.
So how do people who aren't Indians accept you in certainly in the Bay Area where there's a lot of you, but in other parts of
In
the
the
United
Bay
States?
Area, I mean, you feel completely accepted.
Yeah.
I think when I look at non-Indians, my American friends are, I mean, California is a blue state,
Yeah.
and a state that very much believes in immigration.
Yeah.
And I was quite amazed at how deeply people here want to fight for immigrants. And I think I've seen the best of America. People have just gone out of their way to make me feel comfortable, and to make my husband feel comfortable because they want immigrants here, you know. So when one talks of living in the shadows, with particularly, I think maybe you're referring to my piece on H1b visas. I'd say that's because of the visa policy and the immigration system, and the way the immigration system sort of works here, and not the people themselves that I've interacted with.
Yeah. Well, I was on an H1b visa as well, and we just, for the first 3 years it was fine, but then we had to get it renewed, and it was horrendous. The US Citizenship and Immigration Services were very busy, is the nicest way of putting it, and it was quite a challenge, particularly for Diane, who was on an H4 visa, which was a spouse visa, which meant she couldn't work and various other things. So to some extent, Diane felt like a non-citizen. It's the first time in our life, certainly for Diane, where she didn't feel like she had a lot of rights. And that's interesting, because coming back to Australia, of course, I do have rights. I can be very critical of my government because I'm an Australian citizen, but I didn't feel, not that the Americans inhibited me, but I did feel that I needed to be a little polite about US politics and be a little bit more circumspect and reserved, perhaps. So how are you finding the whole political process, particularly after the wonderful debate the other night, or was it a debacle?
You know, when you talk about being a little polite, my American friends have dragged me for anti-Trump rallies. So, so Americans working in the Bay Area, you know, working in tech companies, you know, a friend of mine just said, come with me for a rally, and she's taken me for 2. And we both had our kids with us.
And no problems? That's normal?
Yeah, completely normal.
Yeah, well, California is so important in the US system because of its size and the number of representatives they have in the Congress and so on and so forth. So how have you found it throughout other parts of the United States? I know you've been to New York because you had coffee with... Yes, you had coffee with Diane in New York, of all places. Yeah. How have you found other parts of the United States?
So New York is Mumbai. So New York was the only place that, you know, I instinctively felt 100%, you know, like this is home. This is not a foreign country. You know, the busyness, the people on the road. My mom was there. You know, my mom came with me to New York. And she felt it very comforting when she saw the broken roads and the open sewers. She said, oh, this is home, you know. So I think I took longer to warm to the Bay Area, which is where I live, compared to a busy place like New York. So I don't live in San Francisco. I live an hour away in Silicon Valley. And the first thing that struck me, you know, when you come from Mumbai, when you come from a bustling city where you're used to the car horn being pressed like 24/7, you're used to noise. I found the Bay Area very quiet. I said, there's just absolutely no noise. There's no activity on the streets. You know, you just see cars zipping by, and I didn't know how to drive when I landed here. I think it's taken me a while. Now that I do drive, I'm more mobile. I don't have to walk very long distances to get to public transport with a child, which I did when I landed with a 4-month-old. I think I'm beginning to appreciate the silence here. I'm beginning to appreciate the beauty of the Bay Area. And though when I go back home, I love the noise every time I'm in Mumbai. But I'm kind of learning to love 2 very different ways of being.
Yes. Well, we lived in an apartment in Honolulu, and it was on the fifth floor on a corner, and there were a lot of cars came around the corner, and it was quite noisy. And when we came back here, the thing that we noticed was the lack of cars, but also the birds. You just, there's so much bird life here, and you hear a whole heap of different things. So the noise of India is extraordinary. And I know there was a period of time when I went to India every year for 8 years, and I'd go up to an ashram in Mount Abu for about 6 weeks. And when I came back to Australia, I would experience culture shock. And it was that same thing that you mentioned, the lack of people, the lack of hustle, bustle and noise, and everything was so clean and neat in Australia. And you'd come back and think, wow, this is too clean, too neat. There's no hint of chaos whatsoever. Yeah. So with the H1b, I know it's been a bit of an issue for people in California, particularly Silicon Valley, with the current government a little bit opposed to H1b visas. But on the other hand, as you said, there's people over there want immigration, and there's this thing called FWD.US, Forward US, and that's a whole heap of tech companies who've got involved saying, we want these people, these technically skilled people to come and work for us. But are there now people, Indians in the US, thinking, we're not so welcome here, we should think about going back to India?
Many friends. People who've lived for many, many years on an H1b visa, people who've lived for a decade in America and more. Oh. And a lot of people have this, a lot of people I've spoken to kind of have one foot here and one foot there. Then they don't feel completely at home in America, and they don't feel completely at home now back home in India, because they're so used to, they've grown roots in America. They've become part of the fabric of American culture without actually feeling like they have a foothold here. So a lot of people are moving back. A lot of people are thinking of moving back. And then there are people who have been talking of moving back for at least a year or two. And I have no idea which way they're going to go.
Yeah, that's a challenge. So how are they feeling about things back in India? Because COVID, of course, has had a major economic impact on India.
An economic impact and a health crisis. So I have friends who've lost relatives because they couldn't find beds in Bombay.
Oh.
They couldn't find someone to take them in. A friend in Delhi, her mother had COVID, and she had to use influence to get her mother into a hospital.
And I suppose the challenge for people who want to go back to India is, where do you go back to in India? Now, I saw something about some people who'd come from Delhi or something and were in Silicon Valley, but if they want to work in IT, they've basically got to go to Bengaluru or Pune or somewhere like that, not necessarily.
Which is not their home, which is not their hometown.
Yeah. So there's that challenge as well. But how do people feel about how things are going politically, socially, economically in India, which I now would like to hear your opinions about some of the political developments. So, for example, first off, let me ask you, were you surprised by the size of the BJP's victory, the Bharatiya Janata Party's victory and its coalition in 2019 in the elections?
I shouldn't have been, but I was.
Oh, why shouldn't you have been?
I think the writing was on the wall.
And then it was an astounding victory. And since then they've done some things that are quite extraordinary, but seemingly popular as well. And the area that I know about, Jammu and Kashmir, they've made all sorts of changes up there, which don't really appeal to the Kashmiris, and also to some extent the Jammuites and the Ladakhis, particularly allowing foreigners in either to live and or to buy land. But these have been very popular within India, and the BJP is very popular, it seems to me, within India. Does that surprise you, Anahita?
It does, because I feel that here's a government with a brute majority, and here's a government that is virtually dismantling the institutions of democracy. You see the media buckling down and, not holding the government accountable. You see the Supreme Court not holding the government accountable. And that is where I tell my American friends when they despair about America and Trump, I said, you guys have amazing institutions that are still holding on and that are still fighting back. Whereas I feel a lot of Indian institutions are just crumbling like a pack of cards.
So
you see what's happening in Uttar Pradesh right now.
Yeah, with the
descent into hell.
Yeah, it's really terrible, isn't it? So how do you feel it's going to play out then? Because we're now 2024 will be the next general election. That's 4 years away. A lot of things can happen in that time. And
the streets. Currently, you see people protesting on the streets, and you also see a crackdown on civil rights activists. Human rights activists are being jailed. They're being put in prison for riots that the BJP is creating. You see people out on the streets today fighting, protesting. I can hope that this would lead to something good. That this would lead to accountability.
What about the opposition? There's no real opposition forces as well. Or there's pockets. For example, Mamta Banerjee in West Bengal and some of those folk. They're not knuckling down, I don't think. But what about the opposition?
Rahul Gandhi is getting attacked. Rahul Gandhi is getting physically roughed up for protesting. But and he's someone who is powerful, who has the means to, fight. If he can be, assaulted, what hope do, ordinary protesters have?
So where is this then going to lead to, Anahita? What's the logical progression of what they're doing now?
Yeah. It looks like Nazi Germany to me.
Oh, really? Oh,
I was talking to a Pakistani friend of mine, and we were talking about the situation in India and Pakistan, neither of which are particularly doing well. And I asked him, I said, was Pakistan's descent this quick? Because India has just stopped being a democracy in a very short period of time. And he said he was surprised at how bad things were in India and how it spiraled out of control. He said Pakistan took a much longer time to crumble. He said it was a much slower descent, and Pakistan's been crumbling for a while. He was surprised that India went so rapidly down.
Did he offer any solutions?
He told me to hope. He told me we both had to hope for our countries. And not give up. I mean, I have journalism, my mentors in the field of journalism keep telling me that we can't give up right now.
So are you surprised that the press is, knuckling down, I suppose is one way of putting it. Being compliant is another. Are you surprised?
I'm surprised at the extent of compliance. I mean, it's like, it's unbelievable. And you do have a section of the media that is standing up to the government, but they don't have money.
So what do you read then? As a foreigner, sorry, let me rephrase that. As an Indian living outside India, what Indian papers, journals, magazines do you read to keep informed?
I read a very wide cross-section, and I'm sort of platform agnostic. So when I come by things largely crowdsourced, sent to me by reliable sources, I read a pretty wide variety of things.
What do you read
I don't think I stick to one source or one organization.
What do you read in the US to keep informed? Same sort of process, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of crowdsourced information, a lot of journalists I like. And I try to, whenever I get the time, I try to read magazines like The Atlantic, which are just brilliant.
The Atlantic, yeah. So how then do you compare the two societies? What are the similarities and what are the differences between the United States and the Union of India?
America is a democracy.
Yep.
That's the biggest difference that I can see right now.
Yeah. Socially, are there big differences socially?
America it's still a democracy. I mean, you can express your political views. I feel socially, Americans believe very deeply in individual rights. The right of an individual to express themselves, freedom of speech. It doesn't matter where I fit in the hierarchy. I can't say there's no such thing as class in America or race. I mean, of course, we know that exists. But I feel like America deeply believes in your right to express yourself. Whereas I don't think India deeply believes that people should be allowed to express themselves. I mean, I see people in tech companies in America going for anti-Trump protests. And I don't think that people in, white-collar jobs in India, in the corporate world, are as comfortable expressing their political views. Whereas in America, it's considered absolutely normal in a democracy to talk about whether you're a registered Democrat or a registered Republican. Whereas in India, there's this whole sort of veneer of neutrality where people try not to express themselves politically. Either you have a very rabid section on social media, which can sort of hunt like a pack of wolves, or you have people who, white collar folks who would prefer not to discuss it. So I feel like Americans engage, middle class or wealthy Americans are much more vocal politically and engage in democracy in a way I've not, many Indians don't.
Yes, that's interesting. We found them very participatory as well, much more so than Australia. Australia has compulsory voting, so to some extent we vote because we're compelled to vote. To some extent, a lot of Australians take it very seriously as well. But over there, it's much more. Yes, we're involved, and this is important. What other differences are there between the two societies? Thinking socio-economically. For example, one of the things that you mentioned in one of your writings was that some of these desis take their caste or their culture with them to the United States. How do you find the average non-Indian American? Are they into those sort of things as well? Class, status, race, religion, are they important?
I feel I don't see a lot of that in this very cosmopolitan Bay Area, in Silicon Valley. But I also recognize that Silicon Valley is not America. Someone I know told me, she's Jewish. And she told me about how sometimes she goes to places where she's immediately recognized as a Jew from her features and her last name. And then there are places where nobody would even know that she's Jewish, and she doesn't bring it up until she figures they kind of like her, and then she'll let on that she's Jewish. Yeah. Which I found fascinating because that is so not what I see in the Bay Area. So I do think I'm not 100% sure the Bay Area is America. It's a very cosmopolitan slice of America, a very lively, very vibrant piece of America, but I'm not sure if it's necessarily typical of all American life.
Yes, that's a challenge, isn't it? Because where we were in Hawaii, people were saying that wasn't America either, for two reasons. One, there's the Polynesian culture from the original Hawaiians, and then the second one is the Japanese culture, and the Asian culture is very strong. A lot of Japanese and Filipinos and Koreans came to work on sugar plantations, and they've actually not only become influential and economically well off, but they, to some extent, dominate the political system. And so people were saying, oh, Honolulu's not America either. So I don't know where this real America is. Have you found it yet? Where is this real America?
And then folks who live in middle America complain that they're looked at as just flyover country,
Yeah, well, that used to be India. India was the place that you flew over from Australia on the way to the United Kingdom, which was very...
Wow.
it's terrible, isn't it? But it is a very large and complex nation. There's no doubt about it. So how do US elections then compare with Indian elections? And I noticed that one of the things you said earlier was about the noise. Is there as much noise in in US elections as there are in Indian elections? You know, Indian elections are very colourful.
Yeah.
How do US elections compare?
Well, the US does have a colorful president right now. And I think he's kind of brought in a lot of the tamasha you see in Indian politics.
Yeah.
Well, currently, I think the largest concern was that he didn't give Joe Biden COVID, right?
Yeah.
They shared a stage, so I'm not going to be able to think of this presidential debate without thinking of the fact that one person got COVID after that, and I think American elections are. They become absurd right now. It's almost like watching this strange theater. You know, you're watching this performance right now.
Yeah, it is a performance, isn't it? And it's ongoing, and we've still got a month to go before the vote. Mm-hmm. Which, we'll see what happens after the vote. We were there for the last one.
What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I don't know, Anahita, and I'm very circumspect because we were there for the last one when Mr. Trump unexpectedly won, and that was the challenge. That all of the opinion polls, well, not all, but many were suggesting that Hillary Clinton would win, and she did win the popular vote, but because of the Electoral College, it didn't translate to victory. So my feeling is that Mr. Biden will win, but I'm not certain of it. I say unfortunately because I think Mr. Trump's been very bad both for the US and for the rest of the world. And Australia, of course, is an ally of the United States. And there are people in Australia who just think that the US system is a little bit odd and that Mr. Trump is a little bit crazy. And I think some of us certainly, perhaps many, are hoping that there will be a change. So that the US because the US plays a very important role leading the so-called free world, and it's the Western world, but a lot of those values that we see from ordinary Americans are really very good and very important. So hopefully we'll see. But, you know, it remains to be seen. So how then do you feel about the future for you've got one young child and another on the way. How do you feel about the future for your offspring?
It's a slightly crazy time to have a child and to be pregnant. It's a crazy time in the world, and that sometimes scares me. And I'm like, what sort of world am I having kids in? But I think kids also give you hope.
Yeah. And do you think you'll end up in the United States or back in India?
I have no idea. We're taking it a day at a time. And I think I've grown to love both places. So
yeah. You can straddle both societies.
Yeah.
So if you were to go back to India, where would you go? Mumbai, New Delhi?
Possibly Mumbai or Pune. Yeah, we've got family in both places.
There's a lot of IT work going on in Pune, I believe.
There is.
I've never been there. It's a very interesting culture, isn't it? A lot of significant Indians have come out of that particular society. People like Gokhale.
Yeah. The next time you and I are both in India, you've got to come over to Pune.
Oh yeah, definitely, Diane. We've just been invited to Pune. Yeah. Yeah, I think I've more than teased you and enticed you to talk about various things. So, Anahita, thank you very much. It's been very interesting hearing your views, and it's a wonderful thing you're doing, straddling both of these cultures, and I hope you continue to enjoy it.
Thank you so much, Christopher. Thank you. And
Thank
good
you.
talking to you.
Thanks, Anahita. Thank you.